All right, Doc, we have a very timely question. I think a lot of people would like this one.
Yeah, this one's going to raise some eyebrows, I'm sure, but this is science, and don't shoot the messenger. That's the problem these days. Is people are shooting the messenger and living with emotions instead of dealing with science. But this one starts. Hey, Dr. Rand, with all this talk of COVID-19 during this past year, what are your thoughts on public gyms and contracting the virus? Do you think it is safe to train indoors, or should it only be at gyms providing outdoor equipment? I really want to train, but I'm really confused between what we're being told on the news versus what some of my friends are saying as far as risks are concerned. Thanks in advance, Derek. Well, I want to answer your questions as directly as I can. Knowing me being maybe a little bit too eager to do so, I don't want to spin wheels too much, but I don't believe we have any studies directly looking at the contraction rate or transmission rate, however you want to call it, in gyms versus not, or with outdoor facilities versus indoor. We have guidelines that are based upon what we know about transmission of viruses in general, and sort of what I would refer to as common sense rules. Just like mom knew when she came and took care of you when you were a kid and you had the flu, she was smart enough to open a window when she could, use Lysol when you had it, and not spend too much time in your room except to give you your soup or whatever and change the bucket or whatever. Sorry to be graphic again, but anyway, what we do know then though is that, and I'm going to give all credit to where it's due to one of my favorite, not just because he seems like a really nice guy, but he seems to be the smartest, with all due respect to some of the others, epidemiologists out there, John Ioannidis. And he wrote a paper that actually garnered a lot of attention, not in the media for some reason, but in the scientific community, where arguably it belongs, but then it should extend to the media, I would argue, because it counters a lot of what we've been hearing. And that is, John has done some two different studies really, but the most recent that garnered some serious attention was I believe somewhere in October, but it dealt with the infection fatality rate, we call it, the people that are dying from this virus. And what I'd like to do is simply, because I'm not going to do it justice, and there's a lot of things in the article that I think are very interesting, and I'll ramble on for way too long, but one article that addresses this was actually published on the site, the World Health Organization site. And you'd think we would have heard that across the world, but we haven't. But it's WHO.int, and the title of the article is Infection Fatality Rate of COVID-19 Inferred from Seroprevalence Data. And what is really great about Dr. Ioannidis is that he's probably the biggest stickler that I'm aware of when it comes to the scientific method and its application with statistical analysis to epidemiological studies. I mean, it's so easy to fool yourself with observations. There's so much bias involved, and he quotes another one of my favorite guys, Richard Feynman, about the easiest person to fool is yourself. So that's the first person you want to avoid fooling first and foremost. And if you can do that, then you probably you're probably on the right course. But the conclusion of that study was that the infection fatality rate of COVID-19 can vary substantially across different locations, and this may reflect differences in population age structure and case mix of infected and deceased patients and other factors. The inferred infection fatality rates tended to be much lower than estimates made earlier in this pandemic. Now that's all I'll say with that one, because again, there's plenty to talk about there, and you'll see from where he made that conclusion. The other article that I think is very interesting was published in the British medical journal at bmj.com, and it's a letter to the editor, COVID-19 Science Conflicts and the Elephant in the Room. And it actually cites a lot of Dr. Ioannidis' work and talks about again, the data that we've actually accumulated at this point, which is much, much more robust than back in March and April. And so we can draw some pretty firm conclusions. To give you some numbers, according to Dr. Ioannidis' work, it looks like if you do what he did, which is a meta-analysis of the studies, a big grouping of all the information we have, and apply sort of the same science and same perspective to it, and I'm being grossly inaccurate in terms of statistical terms, but I'm keeping it loose in layman's terms. What we're seeing is that worst case scenario, according to the research he did, the data he collected, the infection fatality rate amounts to 0.57%, given that there's different variations in different areas and stuff. And that's far different than the initial estimates. That's worst case.
Well, 0.5%, not even 1%, 0.5%.
0.57%, yeah. And other estimates on the, we'll call it the brighter side, are as low as 0.2%. And this is in keeping with some others' predictions that were, interviewed as really great epidemiologists earlier in the pandemic that estimated, worst case scenario would be about 1%. But look at these numbers. This is in keeping with, I hate to use the analogy, but it is an analogy. That's all it is. It's a comparison. But severe flu. A flu, so to speak, for which this particular year, since it's novel, we don't have we didn't have a flu shot for, right? So yeah, we're going to have a lot more deaths, but again, as a percentage, it's very low. And then when you factor in the age groups and you tease out those that are 70 and older, the infection fatality rate is ridiculously low. And again, you can read the numbers, and I don't want to risk misquoting the numbers exactly, but it will be an eye-opener to most people, I believe, who take the time to read this. And then of those that are over 70, the percentage that died that were in poor health and or in, for example, nursing homes, which tends not to be necessarily the healthiest population. They're obviously in a nursing home for a reason. What we call a skilled nursing facility. That's where we saw the greatest number. I believe, and I'll take a chance on this number, but we're talking about 42% of those deaths over 70 were people in nursing homes. So if you take all that and then you factor in this question here, what are your odds of catching the flu in flu season when you're not taking a flu shot, nor is anyone else, of getting infected in the gym? That's one question. I'm just talking about getting infected because I don't want to get the flu. I take my flu shots. I'm not taking this particular vaccine for the COVID-19 for a myriad of reasons, which no one asked me the question why, so we're going to skip that one. But,
damn.
The chance of getting this is similar to a flu season where no one gets the flu shot, right? But the chance of dying from it is, I pretty much just addressed, right? If you look at Dr. Ioannidis' work. So, would I go to the gym? I would. At this point, I feel confident I would go to a gym, but I would be careful, and I would treat it like mom entering my room when I was sick with the flu. I would think everyone's a possible carrier, and I wouldn't do stupid things like, after I used the dumbbell that someone just used, and presumably someone just used the dumbbell. This is a really dead gym. And I wouldn't, wipe my face with my hands, and I wouldn't, breathe too close to someone. I would just assume everyone's sick, but would I not go? And I know this is a really sticky point right now because of, business closures all over the place and people really being affected financially and otherwise by the lockdowns. So, yeah. I would definitely make it clear my stance for whatever it's worth because he's asking me my opinion. Yeah, I'd go to the gym.
But you would have not acted that way before March last year, not touching your face after you touched dumbbell. That's something would have never crossed our mind. Now you're thinking about it.
Well, funny you say that because, usually this time of year, my hands are a wreck because, it's wintertime, it's very dry here in California. I've always washed my hands, maybe I'm OCD, but, not only, as a physician, but before that, I would just always think of, it's a possible carrier. Okay. So I wash my hands afterwards at the gym, I'm very careful when I'm at the gym not to do stuff like that.
Okay.
So for me, it wasn't that big a change. But I think to the point you're getting, no, but why? Because I wasn't scared of getting the flu.
I know.
We had initial estimates of as high as 5 or 6% infection
Right.
fatality rate early on in this pandemic.
Yeah.
And that's scary, particularly because of the way, not the way, but the characterization of certain deaths. In other words, you see an otherwise healthy, I remember it was like a 48-year-old male in New York, in upstate New York, that died. Or no, he didn't die. Sorry, he actually survived, but he was in ICU on a ventilator for 30-something days.
Yeah.
And you look at the picture, and in some of these reports, you dig a little deeper and you find out, oh, they had uncontrolled diabetes, they were 60 pounds overweight, never exercised, smoked 2 packs, and drank a handle every night, right? And you go, no wonder, right? They didn't take care. But this guy, you looked at him and you went, God, he looks fit. You know, you see before and after pictures and you go, what happened? So I think it scared a lot of people because we just didn't know, and not knowing scares people. But that was then. This is now.
Don't you think that those numbers you just mentioned, that should be common knowledge for everyone to know? I mean, we're talking about it on the channel because someone asked you the question, but don't you think that people should be aware of this? Everyone.
Absolutely. And I think the problem stems in part from ignorance in general of science. And this is the sad part for me because even scientists, even doctors and other scientists, I would lump doctors as scientists, don't understand all the pitfalls that can occur with statistical analyses and epidemiological studies, basically observations that we try to aggregate and get something out of, but there's so many pitfalls. We call them biases, and there's other things like signal to noise ratio that involve statistical terms, but in layman's terms, things that gum up the works that can lead you to a conclusion that's not true, a false positive, we'll call it. And that's the problem. So we have very well-meaning scientists even that some of whom are designing these studies and participating in them and drawing conclusions that are bad, but also reading some of these and not going, oh, wait a minute. And I would argue this is across, and I'm not alone. I mean, I at this point, there are some others I love a physician. His name is Dr. Peter Attia, who pretty much sounds to me like he was a surgeon and maybe still is a practicing surgeon, but seems to be making his life, digging up questions like this and bringing them to the attention of the public. But again, to your question, shouldn't we all know this? Not many people have an interest in it. So
what do you mean? Everyone's getting.
I know, but how many people have heard of that doctor, Dr. Peter Attia?
I know.
I bet you very, very few. Or another one of my favorites to listen to is Dr. Rhonda Patrick, who's in the same field. And I'm just naming a few these are the popular ones, okay? Not many people have heard of John Ioannidis, okay? He's a doctor that isn't on, podcasts and doesn't make an effort to put this out there. I shouldn't say that. He does make an effort, but through different channels, through science.
Yes.
So the onus is on us to say, hey, wait a minute, let's learn a little bit more about science and what true science is, and also to dig into it when we hear something on the news or Time Magazine and go, wait a minute, what is the source of this publication? Something as simple, okay, you want to know for biases, okay? Something as simple as who paid for the study. Seems pretty simple, but how many times do you hear something on the news and you take it for granted before you go, well, where'd you get that information from? Mm-hmm. Who supported that funding for the study? Because if it's, for example, and I'm completely hypothetical. If the sugar industry is funding a study about the consequences of eating too much or too little sugar, don't you think there's some bias there to begin with?
You would think.
Absolutely there is. Unless you've gone through extreme measures to try and eliminate that bias, you're going to see some bias there. So again, some basic stuff, and this is where I think, really, this is one of my favorite questions, just because we're talking about this right now. Science in general. If more people could get involved in science, understand it more, the old expression, "An educated consumer is our best customer." That's part of the problem here. Is we're getting. I see stuff on Facebook and other media where we're getting called sheeple. Well, part of that is because we are. Part of it is we're being misled, perhaps. But part of it's our own fault because we're not protecting ourselves against the misleading.
Questioning anything. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. That was a good one. Thanks, Dr. Ren.
Sure.